Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Offroad Update. With only 3 rounds remaining in the 2025 Grand National Cross Country season, the riders have been thrown curveballs all year long. Numerous mud races and mid-season rule changes are what everyone will remember at the end of 2025. As the series headed to Beckley, West Virginia for round 11 of the series, one more curveball would be thrown at the contenders. Round 11 of the GNCC series headed to the Summit Beckley Reserve for the Mountaineer GNCC. No rain in the weeks leading up to the event meant the driest, dustiest race of the year. The name of the game? Hole Shot. As the green flag went up for the front row, which held all XC1 and XC2 class riders, it was a mad dash toward corner number 1. Out of the corner and screaming for the hole shot line, it was a 3-rider fight for the front position. Phoenix Honda's Mike Wachowski would throw the elbows out to snag the hole shot. However, Landers Racing KTM's Grant Davis would carry his momentum around the outside, taking the lead exiting turn 2. Jordan Ashburn would pull a veteran move to slide into second, with Wachowski filing back into third. Nick DeFeo and Ben Kelly would round out the top 5 ahead of the rest of the field. Near the end of the opening lap, Davis came through with the lead nearly 45 seconds back to the Flat Rock Motor Club Glass Gas pilot Ashburn, who had a 15-second gap of his own back to Wachowski, who was 13 seconds ahead of DeFeo, 10 seconds clear of Liqui Moly Beta's Josh Strang. Brody Johnson would make his way through in 6th on track, as well as 3rd amongst the XC2 riders. Ben Kelly, after a few early mistakes, found himself back in 7th, a minute and a half away from the leader, Davis. Ryder Lafferty aboard his Bicon Services-backed Honda would run in 8th, while Red Bear Kawasaki's Stu Baylor would put in an impressive first lap to run in 9th after being just inside the top 20 on the start. Liam Draper would round out the top 10 ahead of his Ampro Yamaha teammate Caleb Russell, while Toby Cleveland came through in 12th aboard his Bell's Electric Husqvarna ride. Big hometown KTM's Thad Duvall was in 13th ahead of Red Bear Kawasaki's Grant Baylor, with Enduro Engineering back triumphs Ricky Russell rounding out the top 15 in the order. Jesse Ansley led the back end of the top 20 aboard his My Power Sports backed Kawasaki ahead of Rockstar Energy Husqvarna's Craig DeLong. Landers KTM mounted Gus Reardon checked in for 17th ahead of Liqui Moly Beta's Jack Walker, as Bonecutter Off-Road backed Jonathan Johnson from XC3 checked in on his gas ahead of Phoenix Honda's Cody Barnes to round out the top 20 in the order. Just beginning the second lap of action, and Davis still had a comfortable gap over the field. The dusty conditions hindering anyone behind the leader, who had clean air and was free to run his own race. Ashburn checked in for 2nd ahead of Wachowski, as DeFeo still ran in the 4th spot on track. Strang, who had began putting together a string of strong rides on his Beta dating back to the end of the ISDE in Italy, rounded out the top 5 in the running ahead of Brody Johnson on his Brian Easler Toyota-backed Honda. Kelly still ran 7th, the visibility hampering his chances to make up any time on the riders ahead of him. Lafferty still ran 8th, while Baylor checked in for 9th, as he actually had company in the form of Liam Draper to round out the top 10. Caleb Russell was next ahead of Toby Cleveland, while Duvall still ran in spot 13, with Grant Baylor and Ricky Russell still rounding out the top 15 in the order, ahead of DeLong, Reardon, Walker, Barnes, Jonathan Johnson, and Ansley. A couple miles before the completion of lap 2, Davis was all alone out front. As mentioned before, the riders agreed that getting the start was paramount. Davis accomplished exactly that. Ashburn ran in the runner-up position, while Wachowski, who had been in a podium lull since round 7 at Powerline Park in Ohio, was finding the form that he had at the beginning of the year. DeFeo ran 4th, while Strang rounded out the top 5, as Johnson was looking for a second XC2 podium in the last 3 races. Kelly ran 7th, as Lafferty still held 8th on track. No battle was shaping up between any of the top 10. Draper checked in for 9th, while Caleb Russell was shortly behind to give the Yamaha pairing 2 riders inside the top 10 in the running. Stu Baylor, meanwhile, had a mechanical issue on his Kawasaki, and his race was over before the end of the second lap. Cleveland would check in just outside the top 10 in the order, as Grant Baylor ran ahead of Ricky Russell, while DeLong rounded out the first 15 on track. Gus Reardon inherited 16th at the expense of Baylor, as Cody Barnes came through next ahead of Jack Walker, running 6th in the XC2 class. Jonathan Johnson held 19th position in the field, leading the way in XC3. Cooper Jones, meanwhile, led the way in the 250A class, rounding out the top 20 in the running. A few miles into the third lap, and nothing had changed in the top three, as Davis still had clear air ahead of him while kicking up the West Virginia dust behind him, preventing a challenge from anyone chasing. Ashburn still ran second ahead of Wachowski, as DeFeo meanwhile lost time and was now fending off an attack from the 2010 champion Strang, and coming with him was Brody Johnson, the three riders only about 15 seconds apart. Kelly ran alone in seventh while Lafferty had the pair of blue bikes directly behind him, as Draper and Russell were beginning to figure out the dusty conditions. Cleveland still ran 11th as Ricky Russell had dispatched Grant Baylor to move into 12th, but couldn't relax as GB was still close behind, those riders only separated by 15 seconds, while an additional 10 seconds back was DeLong, the race tightening up just inside the top 15, being followed by Barnes, who was only 10 seconds in back of DeLong. As the riders completed lap 3 and began lap 4, it was time for pit stops. Davis, with a clear track ahead, pulled into his pits, a splash of fuel, a new air filter, and he was back underway. Same for Jordan Ashburn, as swapping air filters were a necessity to get the bikes to the finish line. Wachowski entered his pits in third, but due to the electrical setup on his bike, altered the changing of the air filter. DeFeo would be in and out of his pits, so too would Strang. Johnson's pits were around the next bend in auxiliary row, so he'd make the pass on Wachowski as well. Kelly had stopped on lap 3, so he picked up a spot. Finally, after all was said and done, the Indiana native was finally back underway, dropping from third all the way to 7th. Caleb Russell was in and out of the Yamaha pits, moving into 8th, while Ricky Russell on his Triumph would make a quick stop, now slotting into 9th. Baylor would enter his pits, rounding out the top 10 just ahead of Lafferty, whose pits were also just around the corner. Liam Draper was the rider who lost out during lap 3, as the rear tire on his Yamaha was destroyed. After a rear wheel swap with a new tire, the Kiwi was finally underway, but lost several positions in the process, filing in just behind Craig DeLong. Near the end of lap 4, and Davis was navigating the rock garden without a worry in the world, the series leader with a near 2-minute gap behind him. Ashburn, using his hard enduro skills, came through with ease, still running second on track but leading the way in the XC1 classification. DeFeo, putting in his best ride since his opening round win at Big Buck, was putting in a consistent ride in third. Strang on his Beta 480 ran fourth, second in the XC1 class. Kelly had moved into the top 5 after dispatching Johnson, but the privateer was still close to the 2021 champion's rear wheel, while Wachowski was trying to make up for the long pit stop and could see Johnson ahead of him at times. Caleb Russell had moved all the way to 7th, and he was starting to feel the flow on his Yamaha. Grant Baylor, with a busted handguard, ran 8th on his Kawasaki. Heading to the white flag, and there was little excitement left to the race. Davis passing by our cameras with the number 1 position, while Ashburn was 2.5 minutes behind in the runner-up spot. DeFeo, meanwhile, brought that little excitement there was left and stopped at his mechanic to reset his dislocated finger. His Kawasaki wrench, Trent Wood, popped it back, and the XC2 rookie was back underway. Right behind him, however, came Strang, who had Kelly closing in from 5th, looking to make it to the final spot on the podium. Johnson was 6th, who had Caleb Russell breathing down his neck. As a checkered flag waved to end the Mountaineer GNCC, Grant Davis came through to claim his 4th overall victory of the season. Jordan Ashburn would come through the finish to take 2nd overall for the day, also taking the win in the XC1 class. Nick DeFeo would hold on for the final spot on the overall podium, taking 2nd in the XC2 class behind Davis. Ben Kelly on his FMF Factory KTM would pass Strang in the final half mile to snag 4th overall for the afternoon, with Strang rounding out the top 5. Brody Johnson would take the final spot on the XC2 podium, taking 6th overall for the day. Caleb Russell would climb his way up to 7th overall, while Mike Wachowski would finish up in 8th. Craig DeLong would charge through in the final 2 laps to take 9th in the order, while Ryder Lafferty would round out the top 10 in the standings for the day.
this year that a start was about the most important thing, or really the only thing that mattered today. You got it, and you took it all the way to the end.
Yeah, pumped to get the whole shot. Well, not the whole shot, I don't think, but I got to the lead really fast, and then just put my head down and got a really good gap, and just maintained it for a little while, and then started to find my groove a little bit more, and then I was riding really good. And then I looked down and I'm like, oh shoot, my tire's gone, it's bald. But the last 2 laps I just rode it in with a bald tire, and I'm pumped for another win and extend the points lead. And I'm pumped for Brody to get on the podium with me. That ain't never happened before. We've been talking about it since day one in XC2, so I'm pumped about that.
Take us through your vision of the track. Obviously you had the lead, so you weren't really choking on dust until you got to lappers, but just how was the composition and just how everything laid out today within the track itself?
It was pretty good. Honestly, the bike-only section was definitely hard in the first lap to see. I was struggling a little bit to know where to go. I biked it a couple times, but still, it's just fresh trail, and I'm trying to rip through it, and I'm just like all over the place, and I'm like, oh, they're gonna catch me back after I just pulled a 30-second lead. But other than that, honestly, the track wasn't bad for all the dust. Just other than the little rocks underneath the dust that were a little scary, but other than that, I honestly kind of enjoyed it.
Another win on the year and extending the points lead. Nice job today.
Yep, thank you.
Just 2 rounds remain in the 2025 GNCC Championship chase, and Grant Davis leads the way by 20 points over Ben Kelly. Gus Reardon, after a 15th place finish, still holds on to third in the series standings, but now only 5 points ahead of Cody Barnes. Liam Draper, despite an 11th place finish, gained a championship point back on Cody Barnes, rounding out the top 5 in the standings. Stu Baylor with a DNF drops to 6th in the points order, with Jordan Ashburn, after his 2nd place finish, vaulting up into 7th. Craig DeLong sits in 8th ahead of Caleb Russell, with Mike Wachowski rounding out the top 10. Thank you for watching, everyone. Round 12 of the 2025 GNCC season takes place October 10th and 11th in Millfield, Ohio for the John Penton GNCC. I'll see you guys there.